Thanks to Professor Klaus Schwab, the president of the WEF, and also Madam Schwab as well. Pelé, Mr. Edison Arantes do Nascimento, of course, has already been greeted and saluted by the audience. However, I think it is fair to say that if the world's community were here, they would likewise be applauding and greeting Pelé, since he is so well known. Greetings likewise to the Mayor of São Paulo and the First Lady of São Paulo, Madam Bia Doria, my dear friend Governor Alckmin, with the State of São Paulo, Cabinet Minister of Foreign Affairs Aloysio Nunes and Gilberto Kassab, Ambassador Marisol, Director for Latin America of the World Economic Forum, members of the business community, leaders at large. As you probably know, Professor Schwab, I have a written address which takes about 24 minutes, and since I have noticed that everyone was very informal and casual in their remarks so far, including Madam Frajano and everyone else, since everyone was pretty informal and casual in their remarks by way of introduction, while hearing you in the past 4 or 5 minutes, I was called to mind or reminded that while attending Chilean president's inauguration last Sunday, as is typical in Latin American cases, very often we have these long-winded speeches and addresses that start about 12 a.m. and do not end until 3 p.m. And by contrast, in Chile, I thought we had a very civilized ceremony, because we had the incumbent or outgoing president, Chevrolet, who was greeted with a round of applause, very civilized, followed by incoming President Piñera of Chile. And then he was given the presidential sash, and he called upon all of the cabinet ministers in his administration, and all of them jointly were sworn in. And that was the end of the half-hour ceremony. Everyone, of course, frantically applauded that, precisely given the very brief duration of what would otherwise be a very long-winded ceremony. A very successful event. So I will decline and pass the opportunity of reading out my 24-minute long speech, but rather just voice very brief remarks, Professor Schwab, since this meeting is attended by a number of investors, and since Mayor Doria's remarks, as well as those uttered by our high-profile Governor Alckmin, have largely acknowledged and praised our efforts at the helm of the Brazilian government, precisely regarding those measures that are absolutely key and essential to ensure Brazil will enjoy development, as is indeed needed. So very briefly and in a nutshell, Professor Schwab, may I say that we have anchored our efforts on key 3 principles translated in the following concepts and terms. Number 1, fiscal responsibility. Number 2, social responsibility. Number 3, dialogue. These have been the key drivers of my administration. As I said before and state again now, from day one, we have supported whether we took office amidst an outstanding recession. And mine is not a 4 or 8 year long administration, but rather a shorter administration spanning no more than 1 year and 8 months. And I must say in hindsight that in the recent past we have been able to bring the country out of the recession and do so while yielding outstanding results. Even recently in Davos, these results have been widely acknowledged by the international community at large. And fiscal responsibility was the result of the constitutional amendment capping government spending. Perhaps the most trivial idea we have applied in Brazil is that one should not spend more than one spends, which is a typical rule in domestic affairs, even in our own home economy. This is the, say, most pedestrian meaning of home economics and capping, or the rule of capping one's spending. I'm sure Alckmin or Governor Alckmin and Mayor Doria will not be described as such, but of course typically government rulers wish to have as much freedom as they can to spend as needed, and we have used that freedom to spend money, but do so very responsibly. Actually, as part of the government spending ceiling, the measure was not at all issued to be populist, but rather what we did is we decided to use a 20-year-long time horizon, because only in the course of time can public spending be controlled, not for the following year. So that ceiling will be revised some 10 years from now, working from the assumption that perhaps in 10 years we will be able to make both ends meet and reach a break-even point between spending and tax collection. Now, interestingly enough, particularly for the business community, we have engaged in an effort to update the labor legislation, which was pretty outdated, dating way back to 1943. We were supported by Congress and by society at large, and we were brave enough to move on with a proposed labor reform. And the same is true for secondary education as well. I clearly remember, Professor Schwab, that back in 1997 I served as Speaker of the House for the first time, and already back then people talked about secondary education reform. 20 years went by, no such reform materialized. When we took office at the presidency, the first thing we did was to move on and spearhead an effort to ensure that the secondary education reform would take place. Of course, we were challenged and criticized, but soon after these topics were passed by Congress, we were totally praised and commended for the work. In the case of the labor reform in particular, I remember that, or in the case of the secondary education reform, we added up another 5,500 new places for comprehensive education. And about 95% of the state secretaries of education from throughout Brazil did come to the ceremony to issue their support to the ongoing reform. I'm just saying this because oftentimes people say, well, inflation has gone down from 10.28 all the way down to 2.27 today. Interest rates went down from 14.25 down to 6.75 today, and still going down. All of which is the result precisely of the reform efforts we have undertaken, and in a very bold but very sensible and appropriate manner in the past few months. Incidentally, Minister Marco Jorge, this is part of a broader landscape of reforms and efforts. And the same is true for Governor Alckmin's agenda. In the course of time, he has been careful and judicious enough to bring together a number of different topics of the order of business to achieve the positive accomplishments and gains that have marked his administration in the state of São Paulo. After all, being in the government is all about managing and juggling differences. And this country, Professor Schwab, does have an extremely democratic and participatory institutional arrangement in place which allows us to work along those lines. So much so that when we talk about social responsibility, clearly in our mind is a keen sense and awareness of extreme poverty in Brazil. And that is why we have programs such as the Family Stipend Program, which does have an assistance and cash transfer component to it, in as much as it will transfer financial stipends to those living under extreme poverty. But we are still keenly aware and convinced of the fact that it is not possible that 20 years from now we will find ourselves in the same venue and forum talking about the family stipend. I understand the forum will be held in Brazil every 2 years from now onwards, as decided recently. Of course, we want to bring people out of poverty by means of socially oriented assistance programs, but at the same time allowing them an exit door to move ahead and enjoy greater prosperity. Accordingly, the Progredir program has been launched to allow the children of recipients of the Family Stipend program to evolve and move ahead by positioning themselves better in society and in the economy. And the idea here is that we will hopefully in the end be able to phase out the Family Stipend program. I have to be very cautious about what I'm saying, because very often the media will just clip a soundbite from my remarks and say that I am advocating the end of the Family Stipend program. Much on the contrary. Actually, earlier on in my administration, Professor Schwab, the Family Stipend was increased, and it is likely to be increased even further up in the near future. So what I am advocating is that there be greater engagement when it comes to social responsibility. Interestingly enough, I often say that we're bringing the country into the 21st century, and that is very much true. Just recently, Minister Kassab As you know, about 3,000 odd mayors came to Brasilia to attend a session launching a geostationary satellite not too long ago, whereby we were able to make broadband connectivity available throughout the country. It may not be that significant in a city like São Paulo, but in northern, northeastern, midwestern Brazil, it is absolutely meaningful in as much as all schools, all towns and cities will be able to enjoy internet connectivity through broadband solutions. Quite a few dwellers in towns in the hinterlands of northern states of Brazil, Professor Schwab told me and Minister Kassab that that was a very appropriate decision because they don't even have phone lines or landlines available for telephony services. So the availability of high-tech, state-of-the-art, and efficient internet connectivity will provide us with wonderful solutions to the benefit of the populace at large. So in a nutshell, I'm sure I don't have to dwell on these issues for too long because our ministers, Mayor Doria, and so many other speakers will be able to dwell on these topics in the course of the forum. And I'm sure you will be able to provide us with an account of what you have been doing to the benefit of the country or the nation at large. So, dear friend, Governor Alckmin, and other members at the dais, may I say once again that it gives me great pleasure to attend this forum, not only because it is held in my home state, but above all because I have seen on a first-hand basis that both domestic and foreign entrepreneurs share a sense of optimism about Brazil, the kind of optimism that had vanished, and we have restored Brazil. While in Davos I said that Brazil is back in business, and may I again say that it's back to stay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have now some time left for discussion. I would like to ask the first question in a very, let's say, in a context of political actuality. And I may first ask you, Mr. President, and then maybe Minister, you are also Minister of Trade, not only Foreign Affairs, so I would like to hear also your comment. And the question is, when I came here in the 70s and 80s, Brazil had somewhere the flavor of relatively being a protectionist country. And so now Brazil particularly, you have been at the protagonist for greater trade liberalization in the last years. And now you are confronted with the US government's decision related to steel and aluminum tariffs, and Brazil would be one of the most affected countries. What does it mean, and how will your government deal with this with those conflicting trends?
Professor Schwab, I'm having difficulties connecting here. Okay, it's working now. Well, this question is really of great concern to our country. More recently, we have engaged in this trip to Chile, but our arrangements were we have to address these issues very carefully in our relationship with the United States because our first commercial partner is China. But eventually, I could say that it is the United States. So when it comes to steel, there's this great concern because according to international treaties, tariffs around the steel could go near 0.5%, and there was this 10% for aluminum and 25% for steel. So again, we have to address this issue very carefully. Now, what precautions have we taken? First, by connecting steel providing companies from Brazil, connecting them with the American companies that receive that steel. And I would open up a parenthesis here. given the reduced Brazilian exports, one of the companies there was going to lay out thousands of employees. So both U.S. companies and foreign companies jointly, they will be able to work with the U.S. Congress, which is very strong in the U.S., obviously, in order to try and change that. That's the first point. Now, the second point, a couple of days ago, we were with the World Trade Organization's Roberto Azevedo. And our arrangements were, we will try and provide a solution if there isn't any. If there's no fast and friendly solution, we will develop a representation to the World Trade Organization, but not unilateral. Not only Brazil. It's going to involve all of the countries that suffered any loss as a result of that measure. This collective arrangement by the countries is likely to provide more strength to this representation, and we are going to solve that very soon. Hopefully, I'm going to call personally President Trump, because I understand that he would be appreciative of any connection from the countries that have been affected by this major increase in their tariffs. For a simple reason, as you have just mentioned, we stand against protectionist measures. We are actually in favor of fully opening our markets, and we're also looking for full openness from foreign markets vis-a-vis Brazil. And that's our stand. And I would say that we are now developing, after 19 years, we're coming to the final conclusion, actually, to reach an agreement between the European Union and Mercosur. And within this topic of the opening, engaging in this agreement between Brazil and Canada and in many other countries which are being addressed by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. This is our position.
Of course, it's difficult to comment on the remarks of the President, but
No.
as a minister, but nevertheless, you are the expert. We would like to hear your opinion.
Pois não, nós estamos atuando no Ministério
In addition to this line established by the President, we have this initiative talking about the Brazilian steel importing companies, that they import input for their own production, meaning Brazil exports semi-manufactured products, plates, which are then added value for the U.S. industry, and that is going to be used for car manufacturing, for household appliances and other machines. So workers who have appeared in a photography with President Trump to celebrate this arrangement, they buy automobiles, they buy household appliances, and they are going to suffer impacts of that measure if they are not well calibrated. Obviously, we must be very careful analyzing those measures. And it is in this sense that the Brazilian and U.S. Industries are coordinating around this effort to show that the U.S. Congress and the U.S. government, whatever negative impact this measure might ensue. We still do not know how extensive they were, because the rules have not yet been thoroughly defined, so we don't know. But Brazil also imports U.S. Coal. We have imported $2.3 billion in steel, but we imported $1 billion in steel-making coal. All of those things have therefore to be taken into consideration within the context of this exchange. In addition to this, these contracts with the different U.S. agencies, in order to provide a list of exceptions, this contact between President Temer and President Trump, I have already sent to the Trade Secretary of Trade in the U.S. I've already sent some correspondence to say that I am ready to meet him, myself and George, to discuss what impact this measure is going to have on the economic relationship between Brazil and the U.S. Professor Schwab, what happens is we have indeed implemented many reforms of the country, and the natural sequence is the social welfare reform, which is locally called as the Reforma da Previdência. We have taken it as far as we could. We have worked for more than a year seeking to reformulate the Social Security system. More precisely because the reform has been brought into this year, which is elections year. And it's only natural that during an elections year, these reforms, which sort of eliminate some of the privileges of the wealthier classes, it's only natural that there's objection to those reforms. And there has been strong objection, because this reform does not reach the poorer realms of the population. That actually protects them. But as one of the pillars of our reform, it's the principle of equality. So we have guided ourselves on the principle that there is no reason for distinguishing between retirement values between private sector workers and public sector workers, because there is a clear distinction, and I'll clarify that. The cap for private sector retirement is 5,645 reals. That nobody can earn any more than that. Now, in public service, there is no such cap. So if you earn 33,000 reals, you will retire earning that amount of money. Now, the thesis we have supported is that there should be a parity between those two systems. Everybody should therefore retire earning that amount, 5,645. That's what's paid by the public system. But if you earn 35,000 reals, you could enter into a complementary retirement plan. So you would retain the same amounts, provided that on a monthly basis you would share a portion of those earnings to contribute to that system. So every month, individuals would, deposit 800 reals, 1,000 reals, in order to ensure this complementary retirement plan. That was a moment when I clearly saw, and we must be aware of that, between the relationship of the executive branch and the National Congress. I realized that this would be an improper moment for voting on the social welfare reform. And now I say that it involves analyzing the agenda of some administrative values. And the very strong issue was the issue of public security, particularly in the state of Rio de Janeiro, which is like a window case of the entire country. So, given the security issues that were developing very fast in that state and in the city of Rio de Janeiro, that led to trying to decide the security problem in Rio de Janeiro. And if we solved that, that would play a role model to the other states. That whether, on the other hand, if thing goes wrong in the state of Rio, it would be a role model for the other states. So we came into an agreement with the state governor in order to avoid being authoritative, which is not, because it is provided for by the Brazilian Constitution. So we engaged with the penitentiary system and public security sectors. And whenever we have this intervention, we cannot have any constitutional amendments, and Social Security is a constitutional amendment. So we had to establish. Now, so is that excluded from the agenda? Well, temporarily it has been removed from the legislative agenda, but not from the political agenda of the country, because there will be no candidate for presidency, for governor, for state representative that will have to include in his agenda the issue of Social Security. Just yesterday I was speaking to the Commercial Association, and I was saying that if up to September, October, we manage to include public security issues, bring them to terms in Rio de Janeiro, I may discontinue the intervention. So we would have the months of October, November, and December to be able to approve the Social Security reform within this year. If that's not possible, the new president is going to take things forward from that point on. That's one point. The other point, the tax reform. I no longer talk about tax reform. You know that this is a term that has been worn out in Brazil. So what I speak of is tax simplification. And in this process, we have been working on very hard and permanently in order to reduce the bureaucracy around the tax system. And as a consequence, we're also looking at reducing the number of taxes. So we're working hard to achieve that very soon.
Asking my next question, I just want to recognize the presence of a member of the Board of Trustees, President Moreno from the Inter-American Development Bank, a great mentor for what we are doing. Now, we distributed this book on the shaping the fourth industrial revolution, and the World Economic Forum has become a kind of, how shall I say, benchmark for thinking in terms of the fourth industrial revolution. You have enacted a number of reforms like the secondary school educational reform, which is important, but what can you still do in order to stimulate, and I will address my question also to the governor and to the mayor, to stimulate a true entrepreneurial and innovative ecosystem which will make use of the creativity of the Brazilian people and will catapult Brazil really into the age of the fourth industrial revolution. Anything else which you could do and which you will do, Mr. President?
I think we're doing everything we can. Just like I said, the idea is to help people be more positive, to be more hopeful. As you may know, entrepreneurs will only invest. Well, most business people, entrepreneurs, they won't invest on something for the current moment. They will look and assess the country's potential, what is in there for the future, and that's how they're going to invest. They invest considering long-term results. And what we have seen in Brazil, Professor Schwartz, is that we've had a huge number of entrepreneurs, just like Governor Alckmin mentioned in his talk, with public-private partnerships that have been very successful in São Paulo, and also in the federal government as well. And that's why we're carrying out this reform, so we can tell people we have legal security. We are reducing red tape, bureaucracy. And this reduction in bureaucracy in the administrative system in the country is what is actually allowing people to be more hopeful. People are being, they hope that the country can be more well organized in the future to provide the legal security for investors, and this is what we've been doing. As far as I can see, it's crucial to have strong investments in high quality education, mainly in primary education. That means to make education universal, since children from 0 to 5 years old in Brazil still do not have access to public schools oftentimes. We want these 5-year-olds to be fully literate when they start first grade in primary school. Secondary school was also reformed by the federal government from Mr. Temer, which was extremely needed. There is a great challenge all around the globe on how making schools more attractive. Schools need to be inspiring. So, by having the first 2 years equal to each and every child, to each and every teenager in high school, and later on they can choose what technical aspects they want to study, is pivotal. In São Paulo, we have a great network of technological and technical studies. We have 3-year-long technological courses, and we also want to integrate private sector universities with our technological institutes, research institutes, and President Temer in the federal government, along with Minister Kassab, went to the city of Campinas in the Luz Cyclotron project, which was studies on electrons to assess atoms, proteins, and different materials. This will be cutting-edge research. What I'm trying to say is that high-quality education will be at the base and at the core of this new challenging world where professions will change at a very fast pace.
Level and maybe on a larger level in the future.
Thanks, Professor. Bem, endosso as palavras do governador Geraldo Alckmin.
I want to underpin Geraldo Alckmin's words. We, at the city level, along with the state government and the federal government, want to have good innovative processes so we can transform the government. And just like Governor Alckmin did in the state of São Paulo, President Temer did that with Minister Serão Filho, who's been a great Minister of Education, has carried out all these reforms, and that is something we're also doing in São Paulo. Now, I want to talk about entrepreneurship. Professor Schwab, Brazilian young people, they have a great touch upon entrepreneurship. Last year, along with Getúlio Vargas Foundation, we carried out a survey in poor areas of the city of São Paulo, and 78% of the answerees, young people, were not looking for a job in the public or private sector. They were looking for an opportunity. They want to become entrepreneurs. They want to own their own business. That is clear. And that is why we came up with a set of programs. The first one is called Empreenda Fácil in the city of São Paulo. São Paulo is where the United Nations has a reference for doing business, and up until May 31st, to open up a company in São Paulo used to take 126 days. 4 months just to open up a company. And along with Daniel Annenberg, who is here, who was one of the creators of Poupa Tempo Institutions, who created a secretary that did not exist up until the moment, it is now possible to open up a company in less than 5 days in São Paulo. In June, it will take only 2 days, and by January next year, it will take only 1 day. That is work we're doing along with the city of São Paulo, the state of São Paulo, and the federal government. Also, public-owned banks and private banks are now granting credit to entrepreneurs. That is about $10,000 of credit with no red tape, no bureaucracy. That means better and quicker access to credit. And just like Governor Alckmin and President Temer mentioned, we launched a great program to reduce red tape. Bureaucracy is enemy to entrepreneurship. Where people see hurdles and bureaucracy, one cannot move further, economically speaking. And we have to go at a fast pace when it comes to entrepreneurship. In São Paulo, 76% of all its processes are already digital, and by July the 1st, we're no longer going to use paper for anything, not even to approve construction projects or anything like that. Everything will be fully digital, and the great advantage here is that digital processes, technological processes, just like Minister Aloysio agrees with me, this is anti-corruption, since it fast-tracks, it makes processes easier, it is transparent, and those who are into corruption do not like that. Just like the project Aprova Fácil. Before, to approve a project in São Paulo, just like many entrepreneurs in the room can tell, it used to take about 4 years for a project to be approved. As of today, it takes 4 months only. And I'm talking about turnkey projects. We're going to reduce this deadline to 60 days only, and that includes environmental analysis. That is how we see that we can support entrepreneurs in the greatest city of the country.
Is Brazil on the move? A new Brazil, evolving, digitalized, creative, good governance. So we definitively wish you all the best in the continuation of all those policies and reforms. But now we have the pleasure to listen to the idol, Pele. Please, the floor is yours.
You got me surprised. I don't suppose to talk today. Just to learn. Of course, you named all the table, our president. Is a big responsibility, but at the same time, it's a big opportunity to be here this moment today. I'm gonna speak in Portuguese because my English is too bad, right? Mas
first and foremost, I want to thank God. I want to thank God for making this happen in my life, because as many of you may know, I had to undergo 2 surgeries. And these surgeries took me out of game for about 2 years. I am still under recovery. I cannot play. So I want to voice my thanks to President Temer and the governor who invited me to be here today, because the surgery I underwent was in my femur and I cannot play anymore. A lot has been said here, but nothing was said about soccer. You forgot to talk about soccer, gentlemen. And I'm here and I represent soccer. So I'd like to tell young people in the room that when I was invited to play for the Brazilian national team back in 1958 for the World Cup, I was about 16 or 17 years old. And I will talk briefly about my story because it is quite a long one, but I want to tell you that I was really proud of that. And the World Cup was played in Sweden. So we traveled to Sweden, and when we got there to play in the World Cup, no one knew Brazil. And I was like, wow, how come no one knows where Brazil is? And many of the journalists, they made me quite angry. because they would say, "Oh, Brazil, your capital is Buenos Aires, isn't it?" And I had to say, "No, Buenos Aires is located in Argentina, not in Brazil." And that is why I am very happy to be here. Even I'm injured, but I'm here anyway, and I have the opportunity of talking about the future of Brazil, specifically the future of São Paulo, which is one of the greatest capitals in the country. And after so much time, I currently can tell how important soccer was and still is to Brazil, since we became a very well-known country all around the globe due to soccer. Soccer provides people with income, with publicity, with new businesses, just like we can see here in the room today. I guess most of you in the room here were not aware of the 1958 World Cup. But anyway, this is a very democratic event, since we have people from every single corner of the world here with us today. With that, I want to thank God for giving me this opportunity of being here once again, helping Brazil, helping our future to be helping the country to have a better future. And when I scored my 1000th goal, I said we have to think of children. These children are no longer children as of today, but we have to think of the children of tomorrow. So make good use of this opportunity. Once again, Mr. President, thank you very much. You have a huge responsibility of thinking about the future. Future meaning kids. We have to look at education. Again, thank God, and I want to thank you for this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Pele. And I have to say, even if I'm coming from Germany, or I'm German citizen and coming from Switzerland, which is in the same group, as you know, I wish Brazil, from all my heart, all the best for the World Cup. As usual, the World Economic Forum is not just devoted to economic and political issues. Social issues are very close to our heart, and not only to talk about it, but really on the ground to support it. So we conclude usually our opening sessions with a 3 minutes awards ceremony for an outstanding social entrepreneur. And I may ask Hilde Schwab just to join us here on the stage.
President, Governor, Mayor, the mission of the Schwab Foundation for Social Entrepreneurship is to find outstanding individuals worldwide whose organizations are devoted to innovative solutions to solve social problems. 23 social entrepreneurs are participating in this meeting. They have all been distinguished for their contribution to improve the lives of hundreds, if not thousands, millions of people. They are based throughout Latin America and the world, even developing new methods to tackle malnutrition, healthcare, waste, educational outcomes for poor students, and much more. Today, I have the distinct privilege of presenting the award to an extremely deserving individual. I would like to give special thanks also to our national selection partner, Folha de São Paulo, and particularly Maria Cristina Frias, for the long-standing dedication to social entrepreneurship in Brazil. I am delighted to announce the 2018 Brazil Social Entrepreneur of the Year awardee, Valdeci Ferreira, Executive Director of FIBAC, the Brazilian Association for the Protection and Assistance of the Convicted. Valdeci, would you please join me on stage? When he was just 22 years old, Valdesi decided his life's calling was the rehabilitation of criminals and convicts. He created the first detention center 30 years ago, which has grown to 46 centers now across 5 Brazilian states, run as a federation known as FIBAC. The organization offers a cost-effective and scalable alternative to the state-run prison system. The aim is to humanize detention and give the inmates their dignity back through implementing a proven methodology focused on community participation, training, legal assistance, therapy, and volunteering. FIBAC's per-prisoner costs are lower than the traditional prison system, yet they have achieved a recidivism rate of just 20 to 28%. More than 30,000 prisoners have been rehabilitated through the FIBAC Federation of Detention Centers since its inception, and Valdesi Ferreira and his leadership team are actively engaging the Brazilian Congress on prison reforms. As a testament to how respected FIBAC is and to how much alternative prisoner rehabilitation models are desperately needed, FIBAC has received high-level delegations from over 30 countries interested in replicating their model. Please join me in offering my sincere congratulations to Valdesi Ferreira for his life's work.